came of age in a little mountain town in inland Southern California, up in the mountains, about 7,000 feet elevation. Not dissimilar to here, climate-wise, actually, and trees-wise. This reserve town called Big Bear Lake.
Oh my gosh.
Not a lot of gardening going there, and my folks did the snowbird thing on an elevation gradient down to the Mojave Desert. So in our immediate upbringing, there was not a lot of gardening there. That had always been interesting. I went to college at UC Santa Barbara in the mid-90s, which in some circles makes me old, but I'm
Not here. Not here. No, not here.
And I studied mechanical engineering there, and I took up gardening. Really, really cool climate. I think last time I was here, I shared a joke of a webpage about the frost-free days in Santa Barbara. It essentially never freezes there. There are some citrus and avocado production areas right in town, and when the temperature's going to get down to 33, they panic and throw up the wind machines and all this. But it's a year-round gardening place and a place to take for granted the lack of winter. I moved north to Arcata, California, which is in Humboldt County, one county away from the Oregon border, and I stumbled upon a garden a lot like the one I run here 20-ish years ago, associated with Humboldt State University, operating out of a city park, a CSA, about 3 acres, growing everything you conceivably could grow in that place. And an interesting thing about that climate is it's actually cooler there than here. Now, I didn't say colder. In the extremes of winter, there really is none. Again, it freezes, but not really, and it snows, but not really ever for any amount of time. But the accumulated heat units during the summer are actually less than here. The all-time record high temperature ever at that location is 72 degrees Fahrenheit, because it's right by the ocean. And so growing tomatoes and peppers was actually arguably more difficult there than here. But getting things through the winter. So we could overwinter broccoli and Brussels sprouts and spinach, no problem, and we could grow artichokes through the winter and strawberries, things like that. But to grow a tomato was even more challenging than here, if you can imagine. My wife was working for the BLM there in Northern California, and I decided I wanted to know where food came from. And we had to go to Ohio, and we overshot the Corn Belt a little bit and wound up in Athens, Ohio, which is the Appalachian part of Ohio, a stone's throw from West Virginia or Kentucky. And I got a master's degree there in forest ecology, but worked on a farm that whole time. And so that was interesting, and I've always had a garden. Came here to MSU to do my PhD in 2006, and I was forbidden to go anywhere near the hort farm because I was studying agronomy and lentils and wheat and barley. And during the course of my PhD program, I drove every state highway in Montana north of 90 and east of 15. So saw a lot of obscure and out of the way places, but I never went to the Bitterroot Valley in my whole entire younger years here. Went and did a postdoctoral assignment at Penn State. So drove back across the country again, spent a couple of years there in that Happy Valley, and did research for dairy feed crop rotations and organic. So corn, soybeans, winter wheat, and cover crops and forages, and had a garden there, of course, during that time. And came back, and my dream job opened up, and here we are. So you're not supposed to get a job where you get your PhD, but if you come from somewhere else and you leave and come back, I guess they let you. This place is a big exception. There are actually a lot of folks who want it really bad and find their way back. So here we are. And finally, I get to do what I want, which is to have a great big garden and hang out with students. So I have a primarily teaching appointment. I do a lot less research than most faculty members do, and it's a lot more applied. And really, to me, what's important about it is the students are involved with it. Grad students, but also undergraduate students. And my classroom style is such that if you'd like to interrupt and ask a question, I'm open for a tangent at any time. In fact, I'm almost more comfortable with that. So go ahead and ask questions. I did put together some slides of data of the sort, just so I could prove to you that I know how to do statistics, but I suspect that's not what will impress you. But I have stories and pictures to tell. So, yeah, that's my email. I have this rule: you should take the average age of the people in the room, and your font size, minimum font size should be at least half that. So are you okay? I did.
Thank you.
I don't know if all the slides, some of these are from grad students and things, so if you can't read some, I don't know. I did go into the DMV, and I had to renew my license, and I knew I should have my glasses with me, but I really didn't want to say I needed them, and so I looked in that thing, and was guessing a little bit, but I did it with confidence. And she goes, "Oh, you missed a couple, but I think you'll be all right. Just wear those glasses if you have to go anywhere where you don't know where you're going." I'm with you on that. All right. So I came here in 2014 and started a bunch of things all at once. But what we're going to talk about today are these fruits here. So an example of some Haskaps is an edible honeysuckle family berry. Aronia, which actually is an industry around in North America a little bit. And I brought some aronia. I did not bring some Haskap juice. We can try that with some seltzer later. Some cherries that are a little bit different than the sweet cherries we grow in Montana. They're dwarf sour cherries. So they're not transplanted, or they're not grafted. They're on their own rootstock. They're not a big tree. They're kind of a big bush or a small tree. And they're a sour cherry, but they've actually got quite a bit of sugar in them. They just have quite a bit of all that other stuff that makes cherries taste like cherries. And so they're snackable, but barely. They're intense. Yeah.
Are you going to go into varietals?
I am. Yeah, I'll show you some data on that. I got a picture of some black currants. We also have some red currants growing out there. And then these are serviceberries, or in Utah you call them serviceberries.
Serviceberries, yeah.
In Canada,
I'm glad you got that
saskatoons.
straight. Yeah.
It's funny, when I was in grad school, I came across some of those in the woods. And I was in grad school, so we didn't have any money and couldn't afford blueberries at Costco. I guess I could afford blueberries at Costco, but at any rate, it's in my nature to I found out what those were, and I found some in the woods, and I picked about a whole gallon of them and brought them home, and the kids were like, "Yeah, those aren't as good as the blueberries at Costco." They sat in our freezer for like 4 or 5 years before I finally, I was like, those are edible, but so these are all improved varieties in some way or another. It might be as little as a selection from what's available out there to intentional crossing and breeding programs that exist in other places. I'm not a breeder. Never intentionally cross-pollinated any of these. I've never done anything except buy plants that are available and ask questions about them. So, and in the case of serviceberries, to me, to be brutally honest, it's questionable whether you would call this a domesticated plant or not. You take a wild plant, you bring it in, you keep the birds off of it, you spray for the insect pests, you fertilize, you irrigate, you keep the bears away. I think that's half of it. It's the wild ones, by the time they're ripe, the bears and the birds get them. So if you find them, you're either lucky or they're not ripe yet. They are better than the wild ones. And I've got some wine labels. So one of the directions this industry is likely to go, if it takes off at all. In fact, one of the kind of the foundations of this industry in Montana right now is there's a winery, out of Tongue River Winery on Mouse City, that makes wine out of all these, and some of them are pretty good. So, this is an aerial shot of our horticulture. Do we have an aerial shot of our horticulture farm? So this is you down here on the south side, and that's the barn, and that's the big grove area, and this is the dirt road you drive in on the way in. That's Garfield. And this is Town's Harvest Garden, so that's the organic vegetable farm that I direct. And we usually, this is the apple orchard. This are those 3 movable high tunnels. And then this is Town's Harvest Garden, so these are half-acre blocks, and in recent years we've been doing every other block is a winter annual cover crop every year, so you see winter pea, winter wheat mix. And I'm pretty convinced that has had our soil quality on an upward trajectory, but it also uses half our space. So we grow crops this way, and then cover crop those 2, and then you'll see us doing some 400-foot long rows this way, cultivated with the tractor to grow potatoes up there. And then this block, you probably noticed the purple flowers coming on. That's a half an acre of sandfoin that we established in 2015. Sandfoin is a perennial legume, pretty similar to alfalfa. It can be cut for hay or grazed. Bees just go crazy for it, and they love it. So we plowed that up this last fall, and it's been in sandfoin for 5 years, and wanted a nice, clean, uniform, hopefully free of annual weed seed, we'll see, spot for a research project. So my latest research project that's going to go there is winter squash. We're going to grow every kind of winter squash you can think of and do some evaluations of their storage potential. So that's there. And then at the time, when this grad student came to me and said, "Hey Mac, I want to grow berries," I thought, well, that's not going to work. Why don't we put it all the way in the very end of the farm, so I have to think about it. That was literally what my thought was. I regret that. But out here on the very far north side of the farm, you'll see, and I was aware that the soil wasn't great out there. There's some weird ups and downs, and the soil's not super deep. But I thought, oh, we'll just stick it out there where I'm only bothered by it and you do your thing. And he wrote in his thesis proposal, he says, and then when we're done, the town's harvest will be blessed with all these berries you can have. And I thought, great, can I charge you to could you put a deposit down on it? Because the very first thing I did actually was tore out the hop yard that was here. I inherited the hops, and they're like, Matt, you're gonna be the hop guy. And I was like, do you know what kind of hops these are? No. And I went and found out the infrastructure was all collapsing. So I was the guy who had to apply for a grant to tear out the hop yard because it was about to fall down. And I was like, gosh, those berries aren't gonna be. Anyways, I've come to kind of like them, even though at first it wasn't the best thing. So this is a close-up of the berry project out there on the far north side. And if you were wondering what was here this past year, you see these kind of, all those little weird plastic tents. Bill Dyer, who's a weed ecologist, was like, Mac, what's up with that giant thistle patch on the north side? He thought it was Canada thistle. It's not, it's Phacelia. And Phacelia is an annual wildflower that makes wonderful purple flowers that pollinators love, again, too. And I planted that there at the request of Anthony Slominski, who's a postdoctoral researcher in ecology. And those cages, that you see the edges up there, that you see the outlines up there that you saw if you drove by last summer, were containing wild bees. He was doing an experiment on he needed a vector source for them. So I'm kind of falling into this role of the guy with the tractor who can plant you a quarter acre of Phacelia if you need something like that. But anyways, this is our fruit project, and it was established in 2015 at the Horticulture Farm in collaboration with Zach Miller. In fact, he's kind of the primary person on this. He wrote that first grant. Zach interviewed for my job, and I got it. And it's funny because we crossed paths during the interview. We're not supposed to, but we knew each other. And, Zach ended up getting the job as the superintendent of the research station in Corvallis, which is about an hour south of Missoula in the Buddha Group. And I think it's a perfect fit. That's better for him, that's better for me. We collaborate, we're good friends to this day. And a grad student by the name of Dirk Setzer. Dirk's a local guy. He's from Three Forks, and he had graduated from MSU, and he wanted to do this, and he was a fan of these berries. He knew many of them well. We were already at his house. And our first question was, will they survive? Even though Dirk told me they would in Three Forks. I mean, that's what we said in the grant. Would they survive? So we, in this very first go-around in 2015, established a location here in Bozeman, one outside of Helena, one over in the Bitter Valley at Corvallis, and then one up on the campus farm at Flathead Valley Community College in Kalispell. So 4 different locations. And this is typical of university variety evaluation type science, as we'd like to know for different places, right? So Bozeman kind of anchors the cold for those, or at least the elevation, right? Warmer, but not quite as much. Helena, I don't know what to say about Helena. I didn't really go to that site a whole lot, but. And it was, we originally called it the Superfood Berry Project. Sorry, this is maybe a little bit small. But there's been a lot, this is a 20-year-old news clip I just got, that there's this notion out and about that foods, and ORAC stands for oxygen radical absorption capacity, aka antioxidants. You've probably all heard of antioxidants, right? And there's this notion that they're good for us, right? So this is actually from USDA ARS, Agriculture Research Service. So this is pretty legit news release 20 years ago saying high ORAC foods may slow aging. Something called antioxidant analysis tells you the propensity for certain kinds of foods to protect cells from oxidative damage. And this is based on human blood and animal studies at ARS in Boston. It's a simple, cheap, unfortunately not super precise, but simple and cheap approach to putting a number on exactly what it sounds like, the oxidative, what it means now anymore. I just told you. Oxidative absorption capacity. So antioxidant power, right? So here's this number, it's simple, it's cheap. Other fruits have gotten into trouble over this. I don't know if you follow the story of Plum Wonderful, the pomegranate folks. I come from pomegranate country down in Southern California. They actually got sued by the Federal Trade Commission for making unsubstantiated health benefits. So you you can't claim to cure a particular disorder unless you have randomized replicated trials and all this kind of thing, right? And they were going around saying that they could cure particular disorders, and the FTC cracked down and said, no, you can't say that. So they got sued. So the pomegranate industry is in a little bit of trouble. And that was 20 years ago, 15 years ago. But I have here a chart of ORAC values, and there's no units on ORAC, it's just a number. And here's pomegranates at 2,300, and it turns out blueberries are a little bit higher. So whatever good the pomegranates were doing in the world, blueberries are probably a little bit better. And there is a lot more of that story. There are particular phenolic compounds that contribute to this, and they might have their own particular health benefits, and we don't understand. We don't know. But I thought, gosh, you can't read this at all. This is terrible. This is a photo I took at Town & Country in the freezer section of the Western Family brand pomegranate juice cocktail. Because if you were drawn in by this and you hadn't heard that it was a scam and all made up, you're like, I gotta get me some pomegranate juice. You can go to Town & Country and look in the freezer case and they have pomegranate juice cocktail. And it's terrible that you can't read that. But the first ingredient, as you would expect, is apple juice. And then filtered water. And then aronia berry juice concentrate. And then grape juice concentrate. And then pomegranate juice concentrate. And then cherry juice concentrate, citric acid, natural flavors, and ascorbic acid. So if you're out to sell pomegranate juice cocktail, you got to put a little bit of pomegranate juice in there just so you're not lying. But really, the cheapest way to get color, naturally occurring color, into the cheapest fruit cocktail products is something called aronia. And so, yeah, can we grow that here? Turns out that the world center or the North American center of aronia production is in Iowa, of all places. And I happened to be driving back roads across Iowa a few years ago, and I stumbled upon it. I needed to be in Des Moines. I didn't like interstate highways. I had an extra day. I was in South Dakota. I turned my phone to navigate to Des Moines, Iowa, avoid highway button. And I was driving these back roads in Iowa, and I'm like, wait a minute, those aren't soybeans. And I pull over, and boy, if I didn't find like 50 acres of aronia. There they are. It's a thing. And it makes its way mostly into processed foods. Pete Fay has been growing aronia over at, he's not around anymore, but since Matt and JC took it over, it's still there. You pick aronia and aronia at the farmer's market for 20 years, but nobody's ever bought one. Because they don't taste good. I don't recommend you try to eat an aronia berry. You'll spit it out. This is too much. But if you can extract the juice from it and dilute it out into a product like this, there's an industry for that. And you gotta have a line into that industry, or be willing to create a new product. So that's a little bit of what we'll talk about. Here's some more ORAC values. So remember, pomegranates are almost as good as blueberries, and here's blueberries, but it turns out there's all these fruits that blow blueberry even out of the water for this ORAC antioxidant potential. So black currants, Haskaps, elderberries, and aronia all turn out to be more than blueberry. And depending on who you ask, these numbers vary, 3,000, 4,000. It depends on the blueberries and where they come from and the year and probably your instrumentation. It's a pretty crude test. But at any rate, when I show you these things, I try to think of them in a kind of relative sense. There are fruits that are 3 to 4 times more powerful as antioxidants than blueberries, and aronia tops the charts. The thing is, as these things get more and more powerful, they become less and less palatable. Right? And so people should be eating more of these things. Kind of my take on it is like, well, eat the ones that you like to eat. Right? We should all eat more vegetables. Should I be breeding for a carrot that's better for you, or should I be breeding for a carrot that tastes better so you want to eat it? I'm kind of firmly into tastes better. Okay, good enough, right? So we're going to talk about blackcurrant, Haskaps. I don't grow elderberries here, but we have some at the other research center in Corvallis. I'm not going to tell you all about that. And then aronia, of course. So there's been a series of grants from the Montana Department of Agriculture Specialty Crop Block Grant Program. So that's money that comes from the federal government. It's USDA originated money, but it goes through the state departments of agriculture. And Montana's very fortunate. We get a disproportionate amount of specialty crop funding because peas, lentils, and chickpeas are specialty crops, and it's based on acreage. So that 1 million acres of dry peas and lentils out there in the dry land ag part, and they take their share of Scudder lab diagnostic work around diseases of those crops and management, but there's more than enough to go around, and we've been treated pretty well by this program. So our first, and I've summarized the titles out of the scientific mumbo jumbo into like what you really care about. So our first grant for these fruits was in 2015, and really the question was like, will they even survive winter? That's all I thought we were asking when I stuck it for clear on the north side of the farm. And then it turns out that they do. We haven't lost a single plant just to severe cold temperature. Now we've lost some buds and we've lost plants to other things, but yeah, these are all very winter hardy, not a problem. And so then the next question that I'll summarize is how good are they really? So let's do a little lab work. Let's talk about oxidative capacity. Let's talk about health benefits generally. And so we did some research on that from 2017 through 2020 with another grad student. And then our most recent grant, led by Rachel Lyso out of the Western Ag Research Center, who's since moved on, but like the new faculty person there in that position is a fellow by the name of Andrej and his wife Joy. They just started, and we're going to continue on this kind of like, how does marketing work for a new crop? Do people want them? How much are people willing to pay for them? How much does it cost to harvest them? I get a phone call, it seems like once a week or so, from somebody saying, hey, I'm thinking about planting an acre of Haskaps. And I'm like, oh really, have you figured out how you're going to harvest them yet? Or where are you going to sell that many? Because those are both pretty formidable challenges. These things don't just hang around in a box on the shelf for weeks while you contemplate how you're going to sell them. Like garlic. People ask me, hey Matt, what should I grow? I'm like, well, grow something that you love and that you can sell before it rots. And, and to me, garlic is like top of the list because you got a long time to sell it, right? So these berries, you got to be able to ready to do something with them pretty quickly. So that's kind of the place that we're at right now, and where actually I'm pretty proud of where our program here at Bozeman has finally developed into. Really, is really about that question. So our collaboration with the folks in the culinary arts program at Galvin College, I send them lots of berries, student projects, make things out of them, feed them to each other, become aware of them. And then I end up seeing those students in fancy Main Street restaurants utilizing these things, so it's kind of cool. So those are our funding sources over the years. There's a picture of Zach on a cold day, and a plant hardiness zone map for Montana. So you guys are all gardeners. Somebody asked you about your climate. We kind of like to brag about our zone, right? What zone are we? 4A, 3B. So here's a map of the climate zones of Montana. And honestly, I don't like to talk about this map because I don't think it's the most important thing. It's something that we like to brag about because it's like, how hardy are you? And it's a number that's out there, right? What is the magnitude of the coldest weather that you will endure? Is it 35 below? Is it 40 below? And then I just throw layer wind chill onto it. It always makes it sound like it's way worse. But I think this is over like a minus 25. So honestly, there's not that many plants for which this is the limiting factor. There are some, right? And Frank's like, Mac, heresy, right? There are some, perennials, and we're about to talk about perennials. But I'm going to tell you that I planted all these, and none of them, whole plants, died because of getting 35 below or 40 below in February. Here in Bozeman, we enjoy pretty reliable snow cover during that time. So things down in the ground are fine, right? We can
Yeah,
go where
man,
we-
what gets you?
What's that?
You can go 10 years just fine, and then that 11th winter gets you. That's what gets you.
And so it's probabilities.
Yeah.
It's magnitude, and what's got us 2 years in a row now is not that it was 30 below in February, is that it was 20 below in October. 4 days after it was 50 above. It's the sudden onset of, it's not the magnitude. A lot of plants can take a pretty serious frost if they're gradually brought down into it and if they've got snow around it, right? It's that sudden onset in the fall or in the spring, right? I remember when I was in grad school, there was an apricot tree on the corner of Grant and 7th. In 2007, I was riding my bike down the street and I saw these apricots in the gutter. And I'm like, whoa, man, I'll take those home with me. That was so cool. What are these people thinking, just letting their apricots? I mean, I figure if it's in the gutter, it's fair game, right? I wouldn't go picking your tree at your house. I'm not going to lean over your fence down, but they're in the gutter. So I picked them up. I came back the next year and there wasn't any apricots. You remember 2007? And I came back in and there wasn't any apricots, and I came back in 2010 and there were apricots in 2011, and apricots, and then I moved away for a couple of years and I came back and the tree was gone. So that's the story.
Matt, we gotta have Don chime in on apricots, because he has an apricot.
You got one?
I've grown, or have had, well, I still do, apricots for probably 50 years.
Yeah.
And we probably harvested a crop, maybe 6.
6
And
out of 50.
one of those 6 was just unbelievable.
Oh, yeah.
1,000 fruit on the tree.
Wow.
And they were really, really
The
good.
tree's still alive.
But,
That's,
And so what it is, it's about how does that tree wake up and know when to flower in the spring? And then how cold is it going to get the next day? And will the pollinators be fine?
apricots just aren't very smart.
They're just now, presumably a smart apricot breeder could work on that and make it work for you, but I'm not that smart. I don't have much time. And there's 6 things. But anyways, it's perceived to be an issue, is the severity of our winters. A lot of these things actually come out of breeding programs in North Dakota and Saskatchewan. Both places that have worse winters than we do here. Some of them from Oregon State, not so much. Siberia, the Kuril Islands, north of Japan. Probably more important, this is a map of base 50 growing degree days between throughout the year 2015 and 2016. We could do this average over the years, but what is the cumulative heat units that we have over the course of the growing season, over the course of the summer? And so we see some trends there in Montana. Here's the location of one of the wineries in Montana. They grow grapes and make wine out of them. And they can do that because of 3,000 plus heat units, corn heat units growing degree days. In Corvallis, we're in the well over 2,000 realm. So 2,000 is kind of what it takes to ripen the shortest season grapes, what it takes to ripen tomatoes in any quantity outdoors. And in Bozeman, we're more like 1,800 on average. So I know some of you will be like, I had some tomatoes that I grew outside the winter once, and I'm like, yeah, 3 of them, right? You know, let's be honest. Like, if you want to ripen a tomato, you should do it under plastic. We really don't have the heat units to ripen a lot of fruit, and so that's every bit the challenge too. And actually, all these turn out to ripen okay in Bozeman. Haskaps, saskatoons, sour cherries, currants, aronia, and then elderberry. Kind of, if they all will survive and all have enough heat units to ripen, work together nicely in terms of their harvest. If you did have a business around these and you wanted to say do a U-pick thing, which maybe would be a good idea, or have fresh fruit to market, you know, it's kind of silly to think you're going to go into business around a crop whose season is only 2 weeks long, and you're just going to show up and try to sell it all at once, and then what are you going to do next week? So, you know, and you can throw strawberries in there and apples. But kind of one of our early ideas with choosing these particular species to work with is that they spread out within any one species. There are varieties that are early and late, and then when you look at all these species, you've potentially got fruit for sale from mid-June, you know, through August. So that's kind of the idea. So we can go through a little bit, kind of species by species, and these are back slides, so I apologize for the smaller fonts. But Haskaps are AKA honeyberries. They are native to a sort of circumpolar place. Linicera cerulean, it's a honeysuckle family plant. And they're traditionally grown in home gardens and consumed in Russia and Japan. There's considerable growth in the market in Canada. They're kind of the thing there. And across the Northern Europe as well. There's a huge diversity in flavor and form, and fruit shapes and timings out there. And you do need to have 2 varieties that are compatible in order to get pollination. So if you're going to plant Haskaps at your house, you need to get 2 plants, and they need to be different. And a lot of them come in pairs. Varieties come in pairs that are named in obvious ways that they go together, like Aurora and Borealis. Borealis, and those are the two you'll find at Cashman's, and they're perfectly fine. They're not the highest yielding, they're kind of middle of the road, pretty good yielding, pretty good tasting, pretty good Haskaps that are in a pair that go together and pollinate each other. And I like Aurora better than Borealis, but you need both. And so there's a lot of pairs like that.
How do they taste?
People will compare them to blueberries because they superficially resemble a blueberry, but I don't buy that. They have a pretty high sugar content. They have more flavor phenolics than a blueberry though. And I would say there's hints of other fruit in there, and they're a little more acidic than a blueberry. And of course, it's interesting, blueberries, well, you guys are, most of you are older than me. When I was a kid, you didn't go to the store and buy blueberries. That didn't really exist, right? That wasn't a thing. It's really in the last 20 years or so that berry consumption among the general public in the US has risen dramatically because there's been the development of the blueberry crop and market by considerable expenditure, both in plant breeding and in engineering, to have varieties that grow from the two major centers of blueberry production in the US are in Georgia and in Oregon, Washington. All the frozen ones are mechanically harvested. And so there's figuring out the genetics for a plant that tolerates that, and then also the engineering for the machine that does it. And quite a bit of hand harvested anymore, or still for the fresh market ones, but the prices at which you can get a blueberry in the grocery stores, it's really pretty impressive. That's a fairly new phenomenon, I have to remind people younger than myself. And so these crops, if they're going to go there, are in the very first steps of that, really. So yeah, superficially like a blueberry. I would use one in a similar fashion. They taste a little different, but more intense. This is a Haskap plant, and the point of this picture is that those are flowers and there's snow on the ground. Is they do flower quite early. They have to in order to produce fruit so early. But the flowers themselves can take temperatures down to 12 degrees Fahrenheit. So that whole thing with the apricot tree getting its flowers burned off by that May frost, this is not an issue for Haskaps. What is an issue though with those early flowers is they are insect pollinated. They're pollinated by native bees, most of which are ground-dwelling bees. And I've sat out there and watched these flowers on days like this quite a bit. It's not honeybees. It's great big bumblebee type things. And they are out flying on those days, surprisingly enough. When these flowers are out, you'll see native bees out hitting them below freezing temperature. It's pretty amazing. Yeah, it's really cool. So here's kind of a map of the world of where these are native to: Canada, Siberia, Russia, northern coastal areas, Asia. Different names all around the world. It's a sort of a repeating theme in botany is how terrible common names are because nobody can agree on what things are called. But I'll just tell you what they all are. So in case you hear about blue honeysuckle or fly honeysuckle or sweetberry, Haskaps or honeyberries, it's all the same thing. Anything new there? No. Sorry. So they are diverse in their shape and in their flavor. Some of them are more elongated, skinny fruit. None of them are round like a blueberry. Some of them are fatter. And so one of the things we measured about in our variety evaluations is what's the average weight of a fruit, and we take a look at their size. There are some differences in flavor. There's one that is thankfully not available commercially. It comes from an outfit in Arkansas that will send you plants that just to me kind of taste like turpentines. They're not super. They're the earliest one, but they don't taste good. But those aren't available. But by and large, they all taste pretty good, and there's subtle differences among them. They all will reach up to pretty good sugar content, but they do vary in shape and size. I'll throw this up there. We have played around quite a bit with mechanical harvesting, and so these are harvested by hand, and they've got a shelf life of a couple weeks in refrigeration. We've identified a few rot pathogens on them, and it's the same stuff that rots all the other fruits. But here's a sample of what they look like. This is painstaking to pick these off one at a time by hand. We have been working on a system. We take a kiddie pool from Ace Hardware store and you cut it in half. You cut a little hole out and you put that around the base of the plant. And then take a Sawzall the reciprocating saw and build up a little attachment for it, kind of a fork about this big, and you can grab a branch on the plant and hold it with one hand here and take that sawzall here and shake, and the fruits all fall. That's how they harvest pistachios and lots of tree nuts, and berries are harvested in a similar system. And it's way faster, but it kind of beats the fruit up. And so this is kind of a picture of that. And the blueberry industry went through the same thing. There are, and I've got some pictures of some other kinds of mechanical harvesters that take a slightly different approach. A machine that drives over a row, and there's rotating, kind of like going through the car wash, kind of smack things around, and the berries fall down. And there was an ASHS meeting in Denver a year ago. They were talking about something called the BIRD, the Blueberry Impact Recording Device. So it's a Bluetooth blueberry, a little fake blueberry marble size thing that you hang in a blueberry bush, and it's got a 3D accelerometer, and it can measure all the impacts that it experiences. And you drive the blueberry harvester over it, harvesting blueberries, and it goes through the entire process that a blueberry goes through, and recording impacts and g-forces every thousandth of a second and all this, and all that goes into your data logger. And they decided, well, where the biggest impact is when it hits the pan at the bottom. So can we pad that surface? This is the kind of stuff that goes into those Costco blueberries being as cheap as they are and as relatively good shape as they are. But even in blueberries, they get beat up by mechanical harvesting a little bit. And there's active engineering research going on right now into can we mechanically harvest and then offer fruit for sale fresh. If it's going to be juiced, frozen, made into jam or jelly, this is fine and far more efficient. If you're going to want something like this, you need to be prepared to pay somebody to pick them by hand. And that labor pool does not exist. So that's difficult. And those are both a variety called Indigo Gem, which is one of the earlier ones, and it's pretty good. I don't even know what Zach means by half native to the U.S. It must be native to a few different places. So chokeberry, not chokecherry, but different than the pure native ones. There are some commercial cultivars. They are super high in tannins and anthocyanins, and they're the only one of all these that the birds won't even touch. So there are actually ornamental varieties of aronia. There's some planted in front of Bridger Brewing, Town Country there, and it's just a berry that nobody will eat. And the ornamental ones don't make a lot of berries. So that's one of the directions that horticultural breeding for ornamentals goes is, can we have a plant that looks pretty but doesn't make a big mess, right? And so that's kind of one of the directions that aronia breeding has gone. And there are a couple of varieties, Viking and McKinsey, that we played around with, and they're largely really very similar. They have a pretty high sugar content. You can make wine out of them. They've got so much phenolics and antioxidants and flavor compounds that they're completely intolerable. You will spit it out if you put them in your mouth. There's a Midwest Aronia Growers Association. I told you I stumbled upon a big orchard in Iowa. There's reportedly 60,000 acres of aronia across Europe, so it's kind of a big deal in the Scandinavian countries. You can buy these. It's a $30 bottle of aronia juice. And so Frank was asking me, like, Mac, why did you bring the little disposable pipetter to serve up the juice with? And I was like, well, it's because it's $30 a bottle. You only get 3 drops. But that's all it takes, actually, to turn your drink purple. So, but if you're seeking it out for sort of pharmaceutical purposes, it's available in pretty concentrated forms like that, specialty retail.
Sugar doesn't make it any better?
Taste-wise?
Yeah.
Dilution, it gets it to where you don't really taste the astringent, bitter flavor to it. And of course, you add some sugar or something else on it. Currants, they're black and red currants. There's a long pathology story here about these were banned from cultivation and we attempted to eradicate currants on the North American continent. So newer varieties are resistant to the diseases of concern. It turns out those were probably overblown, and we don't have those pines here anyways. And so there's kind of a resurgence in interest in currants. Red currants I think of as being dehydrated, kind of like raisins, and used in baking. And then black currants, part of my involvement in this project, I never had one. They've got a unique flavor compound called cassis, which is the chemical compound that gives cat urine its distinctive odor. It is kind of an acquired taste, I will say, but it's okay. It's okay, and I've actually brought some blackcurrant jelly, and so you can try it. And maybe I shouldn't have told you that. It's pretty good. It's naturally got quite a lot of pectin in it, and so theoretically you can make jelly out of it without adding any pectin. And so that's one of the experiments I have some students do is, well, how much sugar does that really take? You just keep adding more sugar. So this is some titanium blackcurrant jelly that some students made, and the lid is still good. We evaluated several different varieties of those. Includin, robata, and HRON. There is a considerable, you can buy on Amazon from the Scandinavian countries, freeze-dried blackcurrant powder. And it's ridiculously expensive. A little foil pouch, so it's like 8 ounces, and it's like $30 or something. And I've heard from people that they buy that to put a scoopful of that freeze-dried currant powder in their smoothie every morning for that unique flavor and also for the health benefits of that. So that's a thing that's out there, and we can grow them here. They grow pretty well for us. Saskatoons and serviceberries. It's a native plant to this region. Commercial varieties are better. It's a $20 million a year industry in Canada, so that's something. Breeding efforts towards varieties that can be machine harvested, and back up a little bit. Haskaps are notable. Haskaps and aronia are notable for not having any insect pests that we've noticed yet. And
Mac, what makes the commercial serviceberries better than the native?
You know what I think? I think it's just that we protect them from the bears and we let them ripen all the way. And why I wanted to back up is that Haskaps and aronia don't have any insect pests. Currants do, and they're fairly easy to manage. Serviceberries, or saskatoons, there's a sawfly. These are Saskatoon sawfly. And it's difficult to manage because you have to spray during flowering. And I'm an organic farmer at heart, and I'll use the organic approved compound if it works. And for some of these crops that would be really hard to do. And serviceberries is doable, but you do have to spray right towards the tail end of flowering, because that's when the sawfly comes on and lays its eggs. And so we use spinosad, which there's an organic formulation of. It's made out of a soil bacteria, and it's got pretty good safety with pollinators, but not perfect. And so it always pains me to have to spray something when it's in bloom, but that's what you need to do to get these sort of Saskatoon sawflies. So what they do is kind of cut off the flow of nutrients to individual berries, and it causes them to shrivel up and just kind of dry out before they ripen up. And a lot of them will fall off, but the ones that don't, make it, if you're mechanically harvesting, you'll wind up with a lot of them just kind of being a little bit kind of like cardboard. And so I kind of suspect that that's a lot of the wild ones just always had those and nobody ever knew or cared. And so if you manage that pest, and you keep the birds and the bears out, and you irrigate them, yeah, they're a lot better than the ones you will find in the woods. I don't know the entire story. There's no breeding program that's actively looking at different crosses that I know of. But Zach makes that claim. He's the expert. We have named varieties. So if somebody evaluated what is out there and put a name on it and described it. So that exists. We have ones called Smoky, Martin, Northline, Lee 3, Lee 8, and JB 30. I'm not aware that there's any serious breeding programs going on for these like there are apples.
But those aren't ripe ones, are they?
No, they're not entirely, and that's one of the things that we look for. They need to be fully turned in color. And so one of the things you evaluate when you're looking at things like this is, do they ripen altogether?
Yeah.
If you're going to mechanically harvest, and there's green berries right next to fully ripe ones, and they all fall off when you shake, well, now you've got a bunch of unripe ones. So I'd like them to mature together at the same time, and I'd like them to fall off when I shake the bush, but not before that, right? and uniformly so with relatively little force needed. And so those are the kinds of things that the breeding programs for blueberries have looked at extensively. Right? Can we get all the fruit to ripen at the same time, and can we get them to not fall on the ground and give us a period when they're ripe, when they're harvestable, that doesn't require so much force to get them off that break them in the process, right? And so they're not great. on that
Do
front.
they continue to ripen after they're picked?
No.
No.
No, a lot of these don't. So that's a really good question. Pears
Uh-huh.
are routinely harvested before they're ripe and put into cold storage to
Right.
delay that, and then intentionally ripened to go, or the ripening process intentionally manipulated with ethylene to get going, and then you buy a pear at the store, it's still hard to set on your counter, and 5 days later it's great, right? And so that's really cool. Most of these don't follow that model, and that's one of the things that Rachel was helping us to figure out, is they don't have the same ethylene sensitivity as pears do, as far as the ripening process goes. There's the cherries. This is a product of a pretty considerable breeding program, actually, at University of Saskatchewan. It's a hybrid cherry. They get about 10 feet tall, but not much taller than that. And you can prune them into a tree-like form. And our 7-year-old plants have this stem that's this big, but they don't get big, like a big tree. I would say a big bush is more appropriate. They're really cool looking color, and great flavor. It's considerably more intense cherry flavor than a sweet cherry. Snackable, but you're not going to eat a whole bag of them like you would sweet cherries. But where they really shine is for processing and for juicing. They've just got a really, really great flavor and aroma. We see up to 30 pounds per plant yield out of them. The
What
value.
age?
What's that?
Like at what maximum age, what's your optimal?
Really about 5 years in before you're going to see your first fruit in year 3, and that's by year 5 you'll be seeing pretty loaded plants.
How is
Matt?
it,
Yeah,
go ahead.
good.
Go ahead.
How are these different than pie cherries that are also sour?
So what I'm familiar with in that front is the Montmorency ones, and those are a tree
Oh,
cherry.
okay.
So they're
That's the
a
difference?
smaller plant. They're compared to Montmorency, which we have one trio, which has done a few things for us. They're a little bit smaller fruit, and they've got every bit as much sugar. Yeah, they're pretty similar.
Okay.
So Matt,
Yeah.
I have something called a Nanking cherry.
Yeah.
How are they?
So that's, I don't know what species that is, and I've seen those, and they're pretty good. You like them?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they
They're smaller.
look very similar.
It's pretty similar, smaller yet fruit. So that's yet another species within a genus, and it might be one of those species, I'm not certain. But yeah, those are out and about and pretty good. And fairly reliable, right? I mean, you get fruit most years on the Nanking cherries.
They have the same pest type that regular pine cherries do?
Yeah. So when the spotted winged Drosophila gets here, which it hasn't got here yet, that's going to be a really big problem for us. And there is a western cherry fruit fly, which lays its eggs, and you get the little maggot. So you've got to spray. Fortunately, when you spray is right as the fruit is turning color. So you're not spraying in bloom, you're spraying when the fruit is starting to get soft enough that a fly can penetrate to lay its eggs. And spinosad works great, and that's fairly not toxic. And that doesn't bother me a whole lot. But you do need to do it, right? You have maggots on cherries. And that's right now. Romeo and Juliet are two varieties you'll see at Cashman's. They're perfectly fine. We have had one variety that in all the years at all 4 of our locations has never made a flower.
Which is that?
I'm having a brain fart whether, I think it's Crimson Passion, but I think I have a note on that somehow. Don't take me on that. So we have a ton of data like this. So this is out of Dirk's master's thesis, and I can show you 30 slides like this. And I'm going to refer you to the Western Ag Research Center webpage if you're interested in this, because all this data is there in tabular format. But here we have a whole bunch of varieties of Haskaps on the bottom, and a bar graph showing you the yield per plant in 2018, which is year 3 into this thing. So I'm intentionally showing you old data here just to kind of show you how it gets started. And we did see some pretty big differences among varieties. So these numbers are in grams. There's 454 grams in a pound, so that's less than a pound per plant. That's 2-ish pounds per plant. We're getting up towards 5-6 pounds per plant in year 3. And differences among varieties. And then if there's a letter, A or B or C, is a big part of what I do is train grad students how to make those letters. If 2 bars have the same letter, it means I can't tell you with certainty that they're different with statistics. So Aurora, even though that number is lower than that one, with across 3 replications in different locations in the statistics, I really can't say with any certainty that Borealis is better than Aurora. But I can tell you that 8519 is better than all of them, and that's striking. You don't need numbers to see that. You go out, it's just a bigger plant, and they're loaded. And we were at 5 pounds of fruit per plant after year 3. Even here in Bozeman, which you'll see in a second, hasn't been the most successful location, upwards of 10 pounds of fruit per plant on 8519. And there are plants in Corvallis that are of this kind of volume that make 20 pounds of fruit.
Matt,
per plant.
if this needs something to pollinate,
Yeah.
so what do you use with that?
It does, and we've got them all out together. And there's not a genetic incompatibility mechanism like there is in some plants. It's all about timing. And so 8519 has a pretty long flower period, and what makes it later is that it takes longer for those fruits to develop. So it will cross-pollinate well with any of the other named varieties that are out there. So I mentioned Aurora Borealis being most common. 8519 is not commercially available yet. It's just still a number. It's out of the Oregon State program. The woman who developed it passed on recently. And actually Zach and Andrej at Corvallis are hoping that we can release that as a Montana variety and put a name on it. It does really well here. So the highest yield, so take home point, these are all fine. These are Aurora Borealis or whatever available, and they're good. There's something new in the pipeline that's going to make more fruit per plant, but you could just have more plants, you know, as an owner. Right? But the story here, the reason I want to show you this is really interesting, is that, as is pretty typical in the plant world, the mechanisms or the things that make for high yield tend to dilute all the other good stuff in a plant. So when I show you the data on the amount of, where's that? So here's TPC, total phenolic content. So this is a different measure than ORAC. It's slightly more sophisticated and more meaningful. This is across all of the Haskap varieties, and this is milligrams of gallic acid equivalent per 100 grams of fresh weight fruit. And you'll notice that the highest yielding Haskap variety has the lowest total phenolic content. And that's exactly what we expected. So Dirk got to be like, you know, confirming ecological theory in his master's thesis defense and all that. Is kind of the reverse. You know, the more yield you make, the more you dilute all the good stuff in it. Now, it's probably still several times better than blueberries on that front as far as the nutritional value if you ascribe. I mean, I do it a little bit, but I'm not a big kind of, right? Go get your exercise and eat a diversity of good things with different colors is kind of more my approach. But Aurora and Borealis, which are perfectly good edible berries, they taste great, they're fine to eat, have easily twice the total phenolics of the higher yielding crops. So if there were to arise some, and producers are interested in this, because if these were to arise as like some kind of a pharmaceutical type of crop where, you know, you're marketing a juice product based on its total phenolic content, or, you know, getting diluted off into a 0.5% into an apple juice blend based on color, potential, maybe yield isn't the end of the story. Maybe something about quality that we're going to measure is as important, and they seem to be inversely correlated. So we'll see where that ends up going. I have more slides like this, but really what I would like to point you to, if you're interested in comparing varieties, is the Western Ag Research Center. So agresearch.montana.edu. And if we just go to their homepage, there's a tab that says Research. You can click there, and we've got cold hardy berries, cold hardy wine grapes, dessert cider apples. You can click on this. You can buy species, so aronia, currants, dwarf sour cherries, Haskaps. Get, gosh, all kinds of stuff. Some things about pruning, labor estimates for hand and mechanical harvest, variety evaluation ongoing. And we've got yield up to current on there for all kinds of different varieties, and there's sources, more of them at Corvallis than we have in Bozeman. The Bozeman story is kind of interesting. We started off trying to be organic. That was the interest of the grad student involved in Town's Harvest, which I direct as all certified organic. So what that meant is we were using plastic landscape fabric for weed suppression with holes burned in it for the plants to go through. And I think that was really the root of our problem early on. So we had okay control of weeds, but it's never going to be great, and you can never find someone to do as well as you can. There's an herbicide called Cajuron that's granular, and you sprinkle it on the ground, and it just prevents anything from growing up through it, including Canada thistle, and it works really well. I personally applied it for the first time 2 years ago, right about now. It smells pretty gnarly. It smells like a petroleum product, isn't it? Whoa, I just smelled some gas. It doesn't smell like anything else in particular, but it's got a strong smell to it. And if you read the label, it says could impact your sense of smell for up to 6 weeks. And so it was March of 2020, and my guy who does this kind of stuff for me had quit, and I was like, I gotta get the Cajuron right now. And I got out there, and it's this granular applicator. It was a kind of precise application, and the bottle cap broke off, and I spilled a big pile of it on the ground. I'm like, oh, what am I gonna do now? I'll just spread it around my boot, so I'm like kind of kicking it around, and that looks about like it should be, you know. And after the end, I was like, oh, boy, I could sure taste that in the back of my throat. And then I read that label, and then of course, not 5 days later, they come out and said, well, one of the symptoms of COVID is. So I didn't get COVID. I did lose my sense of smell for a little while with that one, and that, you know, it was difficult for me to grapple with that. It's so much easier, and it really is necessary early on. Early competition from weeds with perennials is going to impact that plant's productivity for the rest of its life, and we messed that up in our first go around. So we have a lot more variability in our plant-to-plant yields. We have some plants that look really good, and we have a lot of plants that don't look so great. The other side of that is the weed mat that we try to use. Turns out to be great habitat for voles, which will girdle things. So we lost whole plants to that, and we had some plants that got stunted and just kind of had a little bit of bark left and kind of grew out of it eventually years later, but they're delayed by several years. And then you might have noticed the gradual increasing of the height and intensity and severity of the deer fence around that farm in my time there, too. That's for a reason. And then I have chased bears out of there too. So by the time, and then there's the bird net. So we finally did figure out the bird net. It's a system, it works. And I got some pictures of that. So I'm gonna fast forward through all these slides. Oh, I didn't get my bird net picture. So the bird net is this woven net, and it comes in these 20-foot wide panels that are, you know, infinitely long, and on the one edge there's this kind of hoop sewn into it that you put over this wire, and you attach it to the wire with plastic clips where it joins. And inevitably it seems like I'm the guy out there on the top of the ladder, finally sealing up every last little hole like this, because the birds will find their way. So it's a lot of work to maintain that netting. And then the last couple of photos I wanted to share with you, kind of the direction that this project has gone for us here in the last few years is incorporating it into student projects. So this is a student in my practicum class 2 years ago. Obviously between mask mandates or before masks or something. And those are cherries, it looks like. Yeah, those are cherries, but the project, she wanted to help with the fruit project, so we put her to work harvesting things and helping collect data. the project she ended up doing, and I actually put this in my grant report to USDA about impacts, was she works at Rockford Coffee on Main Street. She's the baker there, and they make these things called rock tarts. They're like Pop-Tarts, except better because they have a lot of butter. It's a pastry, and then they spread jam on top, basically. So she made Haskap, Bozeman Haskap, and then she chose to use the word honeyberry. So Bozeman grown honeyberry rock tarts were for sale on Main Street, Bozeman, USA, for just a few days in July. And they sold out every single day, and they posted on it about Instagram, and they got 300 likes. And I said, oh, well, that's what we're trying to do. We're the biggest producer of these fruits for now. I hope that's not the case for forever. Other people are coming up behind us and they're planting these things behind us. And so if I can give them away, give them to influential people in the community who are going to use them, utilize them in the culinary arts program at Bozeman College, have students make things out of them and experience them, and kind of prime the market for expectation, I feel like that's kind of our role at this point at our location, where we've got a lot of variability amongst our plants. But they do survive, and they do all produce something here, and I have some samples to show. So yeah, another example of that. If you happen to be a member of our CSA, we do experiments on you. We sent out different varieties, and these are cherries with a little QR code. So you got sent home with some cherries, and you were asked to scan the QR code and take a survey about how you liked them. And so that kind of data collection is an ongoing thing to do on that. Yeah, it's kind of cool. So, of all of them, the least palatable is serviceberries. So yeah, their goodness score out of 5 is like 3.2 or something. That's mostly valuable for comparison. But we did have one person, the second year, she was over. Those ones from last year. It kills me, but here we go. So I brought some Haskap juice and just a little pipette, and I brought some warm, lovely water. If you'd like, in some styrofoam cups, if you'd like to. And then I also brought some black currant jelly.
Okay.
And some crackers. So you're welcome
All right.
to taste some of those.
Is it time to eat?
Yeah, thanks. I would entertain questions, but we can just do that while we eat.
Okay.